In 1991, a room full of the smartest economists on the planet looked at Japan's government debt and made a call. This country is going to collapse. Bond markets would revolt. Interest rates would spike. The whole system would seize up. That was 35 years ago. Today, Japan's government owes more than double what economists call the danger zone. Debt sitting at roughly 200% of its entire economy. It never collapsed. Interest rates stayed near zero for decades. The bond market never revolted. So either every model economists use to predict a debt crisis is broken, or Japan just got lucky for 35 straight years in a row. It's not luck. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something about money that almost nobody explains correctly. Not because it's complicated, but because the correct version doesn't make for a scary headline. The debt everyone's panicking about isn't the one that's dangerous. The one that actually wrecks economies is sitting somewhere nobody's pointing a camera. Right now, the US national debt is sitting just under $40 trillion, climbing by roughly $1 trillion every 7 to 8 months. Debt held by the public just crossed 100% of GDP, something that's only happened twice before in American history, the tail end of World War II and the peak of the pandemic. Total gross debt is over 120% of the size of the entire economy. Watchdog agencies are sounding the alarm. The story is always the same. Spending is out of control, the debt is compounding, and if nothing changes, the country is heading for a reckoning. That story isn't wrong about the numbers. It's wrong about what the numbers mean. Picture a doctor who only ever checks one thing, your blood pressure. Every visit, same reading, nothing else. That doctor isn't lying to you. 180 over 110 really is a problem, but they could miss a heart attack forming right next to it because they never looked anywhere else. That's exactly what's happening every time you see a national debt warning. The chart is real, the number is real, but it's the only vital sign anyone's checking. Nobody's asking about the other debt, the one sitting in mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and business loans. Total private debt dwarfs government debt, and history keeps showing the same pattern. It's the private kind that actually puts an economy in the hospital. Rewind to 2007. Nobody was doom scrolling about government debt back then. It was sitting around 60% of GDP, about half of today's level, and nobody was worried. What was actually happening, quietly, was that households and mortgage lenders had piled up an enormous mountain of private debt, a lot of it against homes that were wildly overvalued. When that private debt started going bad, it didn't stay contained. It took down banks, froze credit markets, wiped out millions of jobs, and dragged the entire world into the worst crash since the Great Depression. Government debt didn't cause that crisis. Government debt exploded after it because someone had to clean up a mess private lending created. If you were only watching the government debt chart in 2006, you saw nothing coming. If you were watching private debt, the warning lights were flashing red for years. Here's the part almost nobody gets right, including a lot of professional economists. Most people picture a bank like a warehouse. Savers drop off their cash. The bank hands that same cash to borrowers, like a library, except with dollars instead of books. That's not how it works. When a bank approves your loan, it doesn't dig into a vault and hand you someone else's savings. It types a number into your account. That's it. The deposit is created the instant the loan is created, a fact the Bank of England itself confirmed in a research note years ago, stating plainly that banks aren't simply middlemen shuffling other people's savings around. Think of it less like a library and more like a scoreboard at a basketball game. When a team scores, the scorekeeper doesn't take points away from the other side and hand them over. New points just appear. Bank lending works the same way. New money appears on the board the moment the loan is signed. Why does that matter for a government debt panic? Because it means that when the government spends more than it collects in tax, it isn't necessarily draining some fixed pool of savings that would have otherwise gone to businesses and families, which is what most economics textbooks still teach. In practice, that spending puts new money directly into people's accounts, and the bonds the government sells to cover the gap get bought by banks first, not siphoned out of your savings account. Here's the piece that never makes it into the panic headlines. A deficit adds to the debt number. True, but that same deficit also injects money into the economy, and that money gets spent and respent again. How many times a dollar changes hands in a year is called the velocity of money, and that respending is exactly what grows GDP, the denominator in the debt to GDP ratio everyone's staring at in horror. So that ratio isn't just being pushed up by debt, it's also being pulled down by the growth the deficit itself helps create. Two forces pulling in opposite directions on the same chart. The scary version only ever shows you one of them. So if that's true, why does the ratio keep climbing instead of leveling off? The answer is, sitting in the private debt, nobody's watching. Back in the 1960s, a dollar in America turned over roughly twice a year, earned, spent, earned again, fast. Today it turns over closer to 1.5 times, and that number has been sliding for 3 decades. Why? Because households are carrying so much private debt, mortgages, student loans, credit cards, that a bigger slice of every paycheck goes straight to interest payments instead of getting respent in the real economy. Slower velocity weakens the growth side of that equation, which means the debt ratio keeps climbing even when deficits stay roughly the same size year after year. In other words, the government debt ratio isn't rising because government spending is inherently out of control. It's rising because private debt has quietly throttled the speed at which money moves through the economy. That's the one variable the watchdog reports never mention, which brings us back to Japan. Debt over 200% of GDP. By the textbook model, it should have imploded decades ago. It didn't, largely because most of that debt is owned domestically, cycling back through Japanese banks and the Bank of Japan itself through the exact mechanics we just walked through, instead of being owed to outside creditors who could suddenly demand it back. The money that deficit spending created never left the building. That doesn't mean debt never matters, or that any government can run any deficit forever with zero consequences. That's a genuinely bigger conversation, and reasonable economists land in different places on it. What it does mean is that staring only at the size of a debt number, with no context for who holds it, how it was created, or what private debt is doing at the same time, will point your fear at the wrong target. So if you want an early warning system that would have actually caught 2008 coming, stop watching the government debt clock. Watch household debt to income ratios. Watch credit card delinquency rates. Watch corporate debt loads against earnings. When private borrowing is climbing fast and getting riskier, that's the blood pressure reading that matters. Government debt behaves less like a ticking bomb and more like a pressure valve. It's usually the thing that absorbs the shock after private debt blows up, not the thing that causes the explosion. None of this means deficits are free or that spending choices don't matter. They do. But next time you see an exponential curve and a headline telling you the country's about to go broke, ask the one question that chart never answers. What's happening to private debt while this is happening? That's the number that's actually called it right, again and again, for 100 years. If this changed how you look at that debt clock, subscribe, because the next video digs into an even stranger number hiding behind the headlines.